This is Gemara Moed Katan Daf Chof Dalet. All the learning should be a tremendous chos for Shleima for Ruchama Yiska, Miriam Abbas, Cyril Bracha, as well as Shmuel Yosef and Yufim and Rebecca Chaimer Sarshal and Simon Reis Hazel Sarbas Kanan Delita Basim Bas Chaysay Selim Hindel Eliezer Peretz Ben Yudish and Valeh Shosman Miba Shavik Shulchan Shmob and Til Dinu Khan Reizim Chayv Asmina Atinena Shevin Vindos Viva Feir Gidor Revkava Bas Shavin Naftali Svivin Nukhlaster Amram Ben Yaakov Sarabas Kilo Shemizachim and Esi Yudish Lavram Ruchladesh Chana, Abigail Barrow Basets, and Gavrila Baslumi, so Yitzhak Ben Dina. Besides Shar Chali Israel, as well as a tremendous Choshidach, Chaim, Devarish Mirash, it's Gilach and Rivish and Michael Mordechai, Zavshinda, Zavshinda, Shavin Chayish, Madim, the Avalov, Natali, Rachel Bas, Adina, the Shvan, there's Ziva Gagain, Pekara, if you pick it up on the top of Chavdalid Amir Aleph. Continuing the topic of Avelos and particularly how Avelos coincides with Shabbos. Says the Gemara by Minei Rav Yochanan Meishmuel. 1 second, let's get our highlighting up and going. There it goes. By Minei Rav Yochanan Meishmuel. Yesh Avelos b'Shabbos, Ayin Avelos b'Shabbos. Like we were discussing yesterday. Is there a din of mourning on Shabbos? Avelos on Shabbos or not? Amar lei, Ein Avelos b'Shabbos. Yossi Rabbanan coming to Rav Papa v'ka'amri Mishay the Shmuel. So the Rabbanan were sitting in front of Rav Papa and they were saying over in the name of Shmuel, Avel Shashimish Midasai b'mei Aveloi Chayiv Misoi. If an Avel goes and has relations with his wife during his Yemei Avelus, he is Chayiv Misa, quite a punishment. Amarli Rav Papa said back to them, Asar Itmar, why are you telling me Chayiv Misa? No, we didn't say it's biblical, it's forbidden, that's on the level of Misa. Rather, we said it is Asr. And Umishmeid Rav Yochanan Itmar, and you said it over. It's a Shmeid Rav Yochanan. You got the person wrong. It wasn't Shmuel. And then Rav Papa continues and says, "V'ishmielu Mishmeid Shmuel." You heard something from Shmuel. You know what you heard from Shmuel? Let me tell you. The following halacha: if an avel doesn't let his ear grow, he doesn't rip his clothing. Chayiv Misa, that's what he's Chayiv Misa. If he doesn't agree, if he doesn't let his hair grow, cuts his hair, that's a biblical issue. Shenemar, as the Apostle says, we've seen many times. Do not let your hair grow, do not rip your garment. And Veloy saw Musu Vegaimer, and the pasuk concludes, and you will not die. So what do we see? You will not die, that you should do such. If someone lets their hair grow, if someone doesn't let their hair grow, they cut their hair. If someone does not rend their garment, that is an issue, that is a Chiyav Misa. So if one has relations, Shamita during Avilos, it's Aser, it's not Mutter, but it's not Chiyav Misa. Omar from Bar Papa, Tana Be'evil Rabasi. We learned the following in Evil Rabasi, a collection of prices, which is in Mesechtas Smachais. Aval Asr L'Shamish Midasmei Avila, like we just learned. An Aval is not allowed to marry relations during Avilus. There was a person who violated, and he went and he did the Isser. Vishamtu Chazirim as Gviyasai, and Chazirim and pigs snatched his Gviyasai, which either means his corpse, his dead body, or as Rashi points out, it refers to his Iver Shaloi, his member. That's what the pigs were chewing on. Says the Gemara, so din number 1 today is, it's also to have Tash Shamita during Avelus. It's a Derabanan. What's an It's a Deraisa? To not rip your clothing and to cut your hair. Amar Shmuel, continuing Shmuel, Pachaz, Chayva. Those 3 letters, as we're going to see what they refer to, that's a Chayva to do on Shabbos. Natar is Rishos, but Natar is optional. What does this refer to? What's the Pachaz? Pechazayin. Priyas Araish, number 1. Chazaras, a Karala Achir of turning around the ripped part of your garment to the back, and Zkivas Hamita, and sitting up the bed, Chayva. These 3 entities you have to do on Shabbos. They're absolutely obligatory. Again, Priyas Araish, you have to take off the head covering. Chazaras Kara, you have to take the ripped garment and you have to turn it around that you have visible on Shabbos, and you have to pick up the bed. Those are 3 obligations to do on Shabbos. But continues the Gemara about 15 lines down. The first one in line is Ne'ilas, Ilas Hasandal Dashamita Rechitz Yada. Ritayim. This is the Natar. Then wearing shoes, having relations, and washing your hands. Arvis at night and Erev Shabbos. Rishos, that is optional, that is not absolutely required. It's a different level of Isser. That you're allowed to, as we're going to see in a moment, you're allowed to leave your head covered up, V'Rav Amar, Priyas Harosh, Rishos, even Priyas Harosh is going to be Rishos, it's also optional. Again, so to not wear shoes, to not have relations, says the Gemara, to not wash yourself, that's not required. You don't have to stop that. It's optional, as we'll see, the reason being, because these are things are Dvarim Shebetzina. These are things in private, and the rule is Dvarim Shebetzina in general in Shabbos, we are not noyeg. So says the Gemara, the first, the Pachaz, the Chazar Iskara, the taking off the turban, and the picking up the bed, that you have to do. The other three, which are more things done in the privacy of your home, they're optional to do on Shabbos, they're not obligatory. That is Rav Ushmoel, Maishna Nilas HaSandal Rishos. According to Shmuel, why is Nilas HaSandal any different than taking off the head covering? The Rishos, because it's optional. The Lav Kuli Alma Avidi, Desaimim Isanayu, because not everyone wears shoes. There are those who always don't wear shoes. So therefore, if you go and you wear shoes while you're a Navel, it's not as recognizable. So therefore, it's only a Rishut. It's optional to do that. It's not as much of a Chiyuv because you don't necessarily look like you're violating your Avelos. Ask the Gemara, but not everyone uncover their heads are those that leave on their head wrappings. So if you leave on the head wrapping, which was a practice of Avelus, but if you do it, not necessarily do you look like an Avel per se, because there are other people that stop wear these head wrappings, because there are other people, the Megali Rashayu, that they uncover not everyone. There are people that leave on the head coverings. Says the Gemara, again, Lav Kuli Alma Avid Megal Rashayu. Answers the Gemara, Shmuel L'Taimei Damar Shmuel Kol Kara Sheina B'Shas Chimam Einoi Kara. A new din, and we'll see this relates to us. Says Shmuel, if you rip your clothing, not B'Shas Chimam. Chimam is the time, the intense morning, the time at the Kvuros, we'll see, is not a proper Kriya. V'Chol Atifa, here's the line. Sheina Ka'atifas Yishmaelim, if you don't wrap up your head like Atifas Yishmaelim, all the way around, all the way up the cheeks, Einoi Atifa, that is not a wrapping. And that wrapping is not normal on Shabbos. So it says Shmuel, it's a chiyuv to take off this intense Arab wrapping, which was their minhag by Avelus. Because if you were to leave it on Shabbos, it would look like you're mourning Avelus, and you're not allowed to do that in public on Shabbos. And the Gemara says, what is this Atifas Yishmaelim Machi Rav Nachman Ad Govay Dedekni, until the hollows, till the parts of your cheek? That is what this Atifas Yishmaelim is. Continues the Gemara, continuing this din of Shmuel, that one has to take off this head wrapping. Amar Rav Yaakov, Amar Rav Nachman, 4 lines for the white lines. Lo shanu ela she'ein lo min alim beiraglov. That din, the din that you're allowed to leave on the head wrapping, is only if you're not wearing shoes. Actually, the din that you have to take off the head wrapping. If you're wearing shoes, and by the fact that you're wearing shoes, it's clear you're not an aval. Then it's obvious that you're an avilos, and it's not a problem to leave on the head wrapping. It says the Gemara, that's the other statement of Shmuel. What did Shmuel say? Anytime one tears kriya, shaloi b'shas chimam, not at this time of intense grief, is not called a kriya. Says the Gemara, is that true in the last narrow line of Chavdal Amar Aleph Amar li Shmuel? But Shmuel said, Noch nafshei. They told Shmuel that Rav was nifter. And what did Shmuel do? Kari alei teresar money. He ripped 12 garments. Amar ezel gavra davi mistafina b'anei. And he said, a way has gone. We lost Rav, the man who I was afraid. So therefore he went and he ripped 12 different garments. And similarly, Amr Leila Rav Yechon Nachman Shid Rav Chanina was nifter. Karleitz Leisa Itztali Milsa. He ripped 13 robes of silk. And Amar, and he explained. Rav Yechon said, "Ozal Gavro, look at the man we have lost. That Mistafina Minei, that I am afraid." So what do we see? We see that Shmuel did not only rip at the Shas Chimam. Shmuel did not only rip at that intense time of grief. We see he ripped 12 different garments. It must be that they were not done at that moment all at the same time. And we see that Shmuel obviously allows you to tear Kriya at a later time if he himself did that. Answers the Gemara, don't ask from the nifter of Rav and Rav Chanina, Shiny Rabbanon, and you're asking from the practice of Shmuel and Rav Yechon himself. Shiny Rabbanon are different because since in every moment they remember their Shmai Tayu, they remember their teachings. It's always that intense grief. Shmuel would always remember, I miss Rav so much, I miss that Torah from him, I miss that Torah of Rav Chanina, Rav Yechon would say. And therefore that created that every moment was like the Shas Chimam, that intense time of grief, and that is the reason why they were allowed to do numerous kriyas. Continues the Gemara, Amalei Rabin Barava, Adal Rava, Omer Talmidach, Rav Amram, your Talmud Rav Amon said, Tanya, we learned in a Braisa, Aval kol shiva kari lefanav, and Aval all 7 days, he rips his clothing, karoi lefanav. The part of his clothing which is ripped should be lefanav, should be in front of him. V'embal lahachlef, machlef. And if he wants to change his garment, he can switch it, v'kairei, and he has to rip the new garment. And Aval all 7 days has to be wearing a garment that's visibly that you tore a kriya, and if you change, you have to rip that garment. B'Shabbos, what do? As we already pointed out, that's why this din comes in over here. You turn around the garment, you don't see the kriya. If you switch your garment for Shabbos, you're allowed to, and you do not have to tear kriya again on Shabbos. So what's the kasha? We see from this brisa that when you put on a different pair of clothing, you have to rip it. And when are you ripping it? It's not Shas Chimam. For the third day, someone switches his shirt, says this brisa, you gotta rip it. But Shmuel just taught us a moment ago, the only time you tear kriya is at the Shas Chimam, the time of the Nifta, the time of the Kvura, the time of the intense grief, and not throughout all 7 days of Shiva. Answers the Gemara, a special din, as we've seen about the father and mother, and therefore that is the reason why you're allowed to rip it even at a later date. Says the Gemara, beautiful, let's continue to a new topic. Those are things that you rip on a father and a mother. You rip different garments during Shiva if you change. Are you allowed to sew them up like we saw yesterday? Are you allowed to sew up all those garments or not? One says you could, one says you can't. You're not allowed to. That's what he says explicitly. From who did Rav Oisha himself hear it? Not from his father. So we have a raya that Avua, the Rav Oisha, was the one that held that you're not allowed to sew back up. Says the Gemara, no raya loy mi bar kapara. Rabbi Shmuel, he heard it from Bar Kapara. His rabbi. Therefore, we do not necessarily have a raya which Shita holds you're allowed to or not allowed to sew up the garment torn, the extra garments torn about the father and mother. And Aval is allowed to walk around in his unkali, in his ripped clothing in his house. Abaye, and of course, what's the chiddush? The chiddush here is it's Shabbos. We just saw a moment ago that on Shabbos you got to take your ripped clothing and turn it around. Says the Gemara, that's only to the public, but in your own house, it's not a problem wearing a garment that has been torn in Kriya. Abaye ashchad Rav Yosef the parim lei sudre aresha. Abaye found Rav Yosef, the paris lei sudra, that he was wearing this kerchief on his head, and he was going in his house. What are you doing? Shabbos, why are you wearing the turban? It is not a problem wearing the turban in my house. That's Svarim Shabbat Sinah. And based off of that, continues the Gemara, 4 lines from the bottom with the next part of the Mishnah. The Rav Lazar taught us Shavuos is like Shabbos. Omar Rav Gidl Bar Menashe Marshma Alocha Kiravi Gamliel. We indeed paskin like Rav Gamliel. What did Rav Gamliel hold? That a Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur also have a din of regel. What's the difference? That if someone sits Shiva for one moment, of course this is the Psak Halacha. If someone sits Shiva even for one moment for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the halacha is comes Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur and it wipes away the shiva as they have a din of regel, in which the Chachamim disagreed. There's some that learn as follows: Kol Amid Yahim, all 30 days, Tinok Yotzei Bechek, all 30 days a child goes out in the chayk, in the hands of the mother, v'nikvar, and is buried. It's talking about a child that's nifter within the first 30 days of life. The mother, when he carries out that child to burial, does it in her hands. There's no coffin, etc. With one woman and two men. Due to the concerns of yichud, one man being with two women. As we turn over Talmud Beis, let's point out, let's make a comment that the Mavarshim speak out over here. This is not talking about, let's not get confused. This is not talking about a death that happened because the baby was inviolable to live more than 30 days, which unfortunately is often the case of a child that is nifter within 30 days. Sometimes it's even 40, 50 days, but the halacha says it never had the viability to live for 30 days, so it wasn't have a din of a ben kayama. Such a child is din of a nefel, and that child doesn't have all the dinim that we're talking about over here. This is talking about a child that's a perfectly healthy child, and Rahman al-Islan was nifter within 30 days. As the Gemara, din number 1, it's taken out to the kvur in the hands of the mother. Abashal commenting on this last din of yichud af b'shechad shtein anashim, even though normally one man and two women is an iser yichud, here it's mutter. Continues the Gemara, as we'll explain in a moment. There's no shura. The shura is when everyone leaves the kvura, leaves the burial. They make two lines and the other walks through and they all say misnachem. You do not do this for this baby's burial. You don't say the bracha. Ben shleishim, once the child lived for 30 days and then Rachman al-Islan is nifter, it's taken out to burial in a coffin, in a box. And he tells Bekataf, not a full-fledged luskama, a full-fledged coffin that you carry on your shoulder. And he tells Bagabayim, rather we're talking about a luskama, a coffin that's carried with your hands, a smaller one. Find them b'shura. Now, once the child lived for 30 days as a regular din of Yisrael, there's a din of shura. Ben Yud Beis Chaydesh. Now, what if the child lives for a full year and then Rachman al-Islan is nifter? Yotzei b'mita. Then it's taken out in a full-fledged burial in the regular mita, in the regular coffin. Rav Kiva Amer, who ben shana ve'var keben shnayim. Says Rav Kiva, we're referring to over here is a 1-year-old, but the limbs are like a 2-year-old. Who ben shtayim vivarim keben shana, or let's say it's a 2-year-old and it's the size of a 1-year-old. Then yotzei b'mita. Then it goes out in the mita, meaning Rabbi Kiva is being more machmir, not a regular 1-year-old. Says Rabbi Kiva, it has to be a 1-year-old that has some qualifications, some qualities like a 2-year-old in order to get a full burial. Rav Shimon ben Elazar Aimer yotzei b'mita rabim asivin alav, that any time there is a full blood burial, when the child's taken out, the public has to grieve over the child. Then ain rabim asivin alav. If he's not taken out in the mita, like in the original cases, the child less than 30 days, etc., then there's no din. The rabbin has to cry, etc., with the family. If the child was known to the public, he was a cute little baby, everyone knew of him, then the rabbin has to get involved in the kvura. Says the Gemara, and that is the dinim of Rachman al-Islan, a burial of a child. But now the Gemara continues, what is the hesped of a child? As we're going to see tomorrow, many different hespedim we're going to see. Rameir b'shemer Yishmael on the last narrow line, the only time you say hespedim is if it's an ani child, a 3-year-old, an asher child, a 5-year-old. The Mefarshim are explaining the bees and being, as we'll see in Rashi, 10 lines at the end of the Amid. Rashi says, fascinating Rashi. A poor person cares and it's more pained over his child. Why? Because he has no other joy in his life. All he has is his children, and Asher has other stuff. So a poor person has more pain, and therefore you have a full hesped, even when the child is only 3, whereas in Asher it's 5. Rav Yehuda in the first white line, Mishmai Aniyim b'nei Chamesh, Hashim b'nei Sheish. No, it's 5 and 6. B'nei Zkenim ki b'nei Aniyim. And says the Gemara, of someone who has a child when they are older, then they have the same din as an ani, meaning starting either at 3 or 5. Amar Rav Gidol bar Menashia says, Rav Gidol, the name of Rav Menashia, Amar Rav Alach like Rav Yehuda. We pass like Rav Yehuda, Shamar Risham, Rav Yishmael, like he just said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, Ani 5, Ashir 6. Continues the Gemara that where this whole didn't start. We started with the quote of the Mishnah. We started the quote of the Mishnah that dealt with that Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur has a din of regel that it cuts off Shiva. So it says the Gemara Darish Rav Anani Bar Shashain. We are Sasain. We're 3 lines into the Y lines. Rav Anani Bar Sasain Darshan Apitcha Devei Nesiya at the entrance to the Nasi. Yoimechel of Ne'atzeres. Ve'atzeres, if a day of mourning is before Shavuos and then Shavuos itself passes, Hari kan arba asar. Fascinating. That counts for 14 days of Avelos. Therefore, you only have to now go another 16 days to finish Leishim. Why? Because one day before Shavuos, so now comes Shavuos and wipes away Sheva. So it's as if 7 days passed. Comes along Shavuos itself, and Shavuos has a din of a regel, like a 7-day regel. So therefore, after those 2 days, it's as if 14 days passed, and the remaining Avelos will only be the remaining 16 some odd days until the Shleishim finishes. Continues the Gemara, Shamar Avami Vekbir. Avami heard this interesting chiddush that 2 days can be called 14, and he was upset. Amar Atadidei, Rav Elazar. Is that from Rav Elazar, Rav Aishai? It's not your own statement that came from Rav Aishai, so don't, whenever you say something in the name of someone else, you have to say it in their name. Don't make it Rav Anani as if it's your own chiddush. And similarly, Darsh Rav Yitzchak Navcha, Akilo Dereish Galusa, Yamech Lev Ne'atzeres V'atzeres, Harikan Arba Aser. Shamar Rav Sheisha but again, Amar Atadidei, Rav Elazar, Rav Aishai, that is the din of Rav Elazar, Rav Aishai. Now the Gemara explains, Amar Rav Elazar, Rav Aishai, Minayin, 7 lines into the wide lines, of Chavdalim, Mebei, Zain Latzeres, Sheish Latashlumin, Kol Shiva, the Gemara we've seen many times. How do we know the din of Tashlum? If one doesn't bring a carbon on Shavuos, you can do it for 7 days after Yontif, Shenemar, B'chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, U'b'chag Sukkos, Machag HaMatzos, Yish Latashlumin, Mikol Shiva, B'chag HaShavuos, Yish Latashlumin, Mikol Shiva. So it says the Gemara is din of Tashlum all 7 days, and that's the reason why once Shavuos passed, it's as if another 7 days of Avilos passed. So after those 2 days, you have 14 days. And similarly, says the Gemara, Dabri Rav Papa, Rav Avia, Saba, V'darash, Yomech Levnei Rosh Hashanah, V'Rosh Hashanah, similarly, Harei Kan Arba Asar. The same din. Amar Ravina, Elkach Yomech Levnei Achag, V'chag, U'shmini Shalai. Now we bump it even to higher Chiddush. If you have Sukkot, so you have 1 day before Sukkot, the 7 days of Sukkot, and then Shmini Atzeres says, Ravina, Harei Kan Esrim Ve'echad Yom, that's as if 21 days passed. Why? Because again, the last day of Shmini Atzeres is equal to 7 days due to the Tashlumim. Ravina Ikla Letzur de Bras, Ravina went to Sur de Bras, Amar Lei, Rav Chaviva Mitzur de Bras de Ravina, Amar Mar Yomech Lei Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah, Rikan Arba Asar, Amar Lei, Anam Mistaver Rav Gamliel Huda Amina. I didn't say it on my own. I said it's mitzaver like the bin of Rav Gamliel. The Rosh Hashanah is no different than any other Yom Tovim, just like by other Yom Tovim. For example, Shavuos we're saying 1 day before plus Yontif is equal to 14. So too by Rosh Hashanah. We'll pick it up for the new Mishnah the next year. B'siyata Dishmaya.